I'm out today on the hills and fields around the town of Allendale in Northumberland. In the winter of 1904, a farmer in these parts woke one morning to find that two of his sheep had been killed. One of them had its bowels hanging out, while the other one, well, all that was left was its head. Other farmers in the area too woke to find that their sheep had been killed as well. They had bite marks on their leg and their necks. Whatever had killed these sheep had been big.
The Newcastle Evening Chronicle was the first newspaper to report on the wolf on the 5th of December 1904. But within the next couple of days, papers from across the country had reported on the story. But the last wild wolf in England had been killed centuries ago. So where did this wolf come from? Fingers were quickly pointed at a man named Captain Bain from the nearby village of Shotley Bridge in County Durham. 3 months earlier, a wolf had escaped from a small zoo in Shotley Bridge, and Mr. Bain was the owner. Bain denied that his wolf was to blame. "It is no harm to man or beast," he said. His wolf was small, and, as Shotley Bridge police station confirmed, it was only 4.5 months old. Too young and too small to do this kind of damage. And it didn't match the description of the huge beast that people had seen in Allendale.
Dozens of sheep had now been slaughtered, and sightings of a large wolf were very common and frequent around these parts. However, one thing that was inconsistent was the colour that people reported the wolf to be. Some said it was black, some said it was brown, some said it was dun. But it wasn't long before the wolf moved away from totally isolated farming areas like this and moved into villages. It was sighted behind the school in the village of Allenheads, so that's where we're going to head to next.
Allenheads is a village to the south of Allendale town, about 7.5 miles. It was founded in the late 1800s as a mining village, and there are still plenty of reminders of its past to be seen. Yet, this lasted less than 2 decades, and in 1896 the mine was closed, devastating the local community. It's like stepping back in time being here. Most of this, I imagine, would have looked much the same back in 1904. There's no school here now, but the schoolhouse still remains, just up there. It's now a mix of a private residence, an observatory, and an arts and crafts centre.
When the wolf was seen here in Allenheads, it was seen right in this spot, behind the back of the old schoolhouse. Perhaps when the children were in session at school, or perhaps when the caretaker was in at night. In any case, this was the last straw for a lot of local people, and so they formed a hunting party, 150 men, many of whom were armed with rifles and shotguns. And they scanned this entire area. They went on a big search for it, but they didn't find the wolf. They found evidence of a place that the wolf had been sleeping. Perhaps they found some fur, but that's the conclusion they came to. The wolf had been sleeping somewhere around this area where it was seen, but it was long gone, of course.
The following couple of weeks there were countless sightings and dozens of searches undertaken. Armed men, sometimes in groups of up to 200, were patrolling woodlands, moorlands, fields and valleys. Right now, you're seeing a good number of newspaper articles from the middle of December 1904, which I've searched for in archives. While reading through these articles, I noticed that we get a lot of detail about the wolf attacks. We get the names of the farmers who lost sheep. We get the locations and times of meetings. We get locations of where the wolf was seen, as well as the names and occupations of those that saw it. We get details of the searches, such as the weather, the clues that were found, and the sightings. Reports come from respectable and reliable sources, such as gamekeepers, landowners, farmers, agents of the local MP. We get fascinating details, such as attempted shots on the wolf and a border collie that returned to its master with its jaw badly torn, having fought with the wolf. Yet, as time goes on, we get more and more supposed sightings and engagements with the wolf from a much wider area. Stories become more vague and, in some cases, ludicrous. There's reports of the wolf swimming the River Tyne and reaching areas miles away from where all this had started. We now enter a stage where people from across South Northumberland and Northern County Durham are supposedly seeing the wolf, and it's impossible to tell whether they genuinely believe they have, or are simply saying they have in order to tell a good story. As the Hartlepool Northern Daily Mail said on the 17th of December, there are 1,000 tales and rumours around the countryside. The wolf's narrow escapes and the escapes of prospective victims are the staple tales. One farmer, living alone in the Dales, is said to have returned home a few days ago and found the wolf lurking outside his dwelling. He rushed indoors in a state of nervous excitement and seized the domestic cat and flung it hurriedly to the hungry wolf. There was indeed a wolf. It had killed the sheep of John Robson of Middlehope and Harrison Heslop of Briarhope in the first week of December. This was truth from the days before the sensationalism. But the nameless man throwing his cat to a hungry wolf that he snuck past, that's clearly a lie. The truth has been lost in between. But back to Allendale and the surrounding area. In response to the increasing number of dead sheep and the reports of genuine sightings and tracks, at this point people were getting very worried. Panic set in. No more would farmers leave livestock outside during the night. They'd be housed in barns and stables. Lanterns were lit, and they were kept burning all night outside homes and farmsteads in hope of scaring away the wolf. A large meeting of farmers from the area was held on the 20th of December, and it was chaired by Mr. John Balden, the local agent to Allendale's MP, Wentworth Henry Canning Beaumont, and this was a man who had organised some of the big hunts in the area. A £5 reward was offered for the wolf's skin, and as a result of all this, a group was set up called the Hexham Wolf Committee to organise and coordinate efforts to find and kill the creature. Sheep are still being killed around this time, and we have the names of the farmers who were the victims, but it's around this week that the press starts to publish articles suggesting that the wolf is a hoax or exists in people's imaginations, as everyone is caught up in the excitement. Some articles even suggest that it's just a dog, not a wolf. This, in part, is a reason that the committee is set up, to find out what exactly is going on. The committee decided to employ the services of the much respected Hayden Bridge hounds. You'd be hard-pressed to find a better bunch of trackers in the north of England, but they had no success. Not even Monarch, the celebrity-prized bloodhound, could find a scent. American writer and researcher Charles Fort wrote about the story of the Allendale wolf in his 1931 book Lo, and he was very sceptical of the whole affair. Regarding the bloodhound, he said, "The wise dog was put on what was supposed to be the trail of the wolf, but if there weren't any wolf, who can blame a celebrated bloodhound for not smelling something that wasn't?" Yet, Ford wasn't in Allendale. The wolf was real enough. It had been seen many times, and by now over 40 sheep had been killed. Perhaps the real question is, why couldn't the dogs pick up a scent? The committee had been in touch with 2 professional hunters in Canada and South Africa who had offered the services. The Allendale wolf was world famous, it seems, but their fee was quite excessive. It just so happened, though, that a game hunter with experience in India named Mr. William Briddick lived in the Durham village of Towlaw, and he'd come to Hexham to offer his services. He pointed out that big group hunts were a waste of time and that sheep should be used as bait so that he can get a clean shot. He told the press that he'd be hunting this wolf along scientific lines. Yet, he was unsuccessful and didn't see the wolf. But strangely, the fear and the panic that the locals had been feeling turned into feelings of excitement. Searches and hunts continued, but they seemed to take on a sense of occasion. People liked the drama and the spectacle, and many began to attend the hunts in fancy dress, singing songs, and just out to have a fun experience. Regardless, the searches continued throughout December, and on the 29th it was faced down by 2 men, but escaped by jumping over a high wall. Now at first, this might just seem like a story that these men made up to impress their friends, but we'll come back to this later on. It was a shame though that they didn't manage to finish it off, because the next day it was seen attacking a black-faced ewe. The wolf was again encountered by some local boys and a group of women who screamed, which then seemed to scare the wolf away. We're approaching the end of the reports of the wolf attacks now, and we're reaching the very unexpected conclusion to this story, but before that, it's important that I show you an article from the Durham County Advertiser on Friday the 23rd of December, tucked away at the bottom of page 5. It's the account of an interview between a journalist and Captain Bain of Shotley Bridge, which came about in response of Bain offering £5 for the capture or killing of his escaped wolf. Now in this interview, he reveals some interesting information that's vitally important. He says that his wolf that escaped, which he called Ivanovich, was bought from Birmingham Zoo. His aim was to have it breed with a second wolf that he owned, in order for him to have the resulting pup be reared by a border collie so he could observe its influence. His other wolf, a she-wolf, was called Baravosky, and she was in the room with the journalist and Bain during this interview. Bain said, "Baravosky was always affectionate, followed me about like a dog, but Ivanovich never took kindly to her, and as a matter of fact, he was not an amicable beast. I have had him in my lap many a time, and he has submitted to be stroked, but he was always suspicious." Bain then says that he was a big, gaunt brute. Point number 1. Bain admits his escaped wolf was an unfriendly and unaffectionate animal that was a big animal, even when it was just a pup. Now, when asked about the escape of the wolf, Bain tells the journalist that he believes his wolf had been released and hadn't escaped. The newspaper notes that Bain's wolf's den was as safe and secure as any dungeon with secured iron bars. Point number 2, the wolf had been released intentionally as it had no way of escaping. Given more detail on the description, Bain says that his wolf pup resembled a collie, except that it was longer in the limb and in the nose. He then says, by this time he will be full grown, if he is alive. Bain also mentions that the wolf will be about a year old now. Strange, given his earlier insistence that it was 4.5 months old, which it was registered with the police as being. Point number 3, Bain admits the wolf is about a year old, and is long in the limb. The journalist then talks to Bain about a description of the wolf given to him by one of the men in Allendale who was within 20 yards of the creature. The description was that it was grey on the back and a lighter shade on the side. It was long in the limb and jumped up on a stone wall with ease. Far from denying this, Bain replies, "The description certainly fits Ivanovich, who was a great jumper. You can see his claw marks along the roof of the den." Point number 4, Bain admits the very specific description given in Allendale matches his wolf, and admits with evidence that his wolf is a fantastic jumper. Moving on now, Bain states that his wolf had a taste for horse flesh. In fact, we find out that the wolf was fed chiefly on horse flesh. Bain says that he leaves pieces of horse in the wolf's den with an open door, where he set a trap, hoping his wolf will come back one night. Point number 5, the wolf likes horse meat. Now, despite all these admissions, Bain states that he resents the suggestion that his escaped wolf is the same wolf that's terrorising Allendale. He says he'll admit no liability for all the dalesman's losses, claiming that They'll charge me with all the diseased and stolen sheep in the county. Point number 6. Bain will still not admit there being any chance that the Allendale wolf might be his. And finally, point number 7. Bain offers a £5 reward for the return of the wolf, dead or alive. Wolf killed near Carlisle, the papers reported. On Thursday the 29th of December, a wolf had been cut in two on the railway tracks at Cumwinton, 4 miles from Carlisle. It had been hit by an express train, and railway workers had found the body and buried it, but then dug it up and sewed it together again, thinking that there was money to be made. Which there was, because postcards like this were to sell very well. The previous day, Mr. Stuart Cole from Cumwinton saw the wolf cross the main street of the village and leap over a wall into a field. It had apparently come from the east. And he tells villagers what he's seen, but of course nobody believes him, which was understandable. Lots of people right now are saying that they've seen the wolf. Most of them are probably liars. Yet, at midnight, Miss Pattinson, who lived in the village, heard howls outside. A horse had also been killed in this village earlier that day. Could this possibly be the work of a wolf that was raised eating horse flesh? The wolf was reported as being grey in colour too, which, in addition to the dead horse and the fact it was seen jumping over a wall and the fact it was seen coming from the east, it really doesn't bode well for Captain Bain. You'd think that by now he'd be packing his bags and fleeing to Australia, but no, he's on the first train to Carlisle in order for him to tell everyone that it's actually not his wolf because it's too mature. The press was convinced. The Allendale wolf was dead. The Hexham Courant and the Wolf Committee disagreed though. They argued that the wolf wouldn't have gone 30 miles west and surely would have been spotted by someone, and that it would have left a trail of dead livestock if it had gone west. My response to this is that the wolf didn't always kill. There were fields full of sheep all around Cumwinton, and the wolf didn't kill a single one while it was there. There were still reports in Allendale from hunters saying that they'd seen the wolf, yet farmers reported no further dead livestock. One story claims that someone saw the wolf trapped in a snare, but there's no evidence to support this. By late January, there were barely any more stories on the wolf, no more sightings or attacks. I did find one article from June 1905 from the Shields Daily Gazette, which claims the famous wolf has returned to Allendale after 6 sheep were killed, but this openly admits it's just a rumour. So what is the conclusion here? Bain was never brought to account for the damages caused by this wolf, due to the lack of evidence brought forward proving it was his wolf that did all this damage. From the interview with Bain that I analysed, he pretty much gives the game away that it was his wolf that was to blame. The description matches in pretty much every way. Additionally though, there's the simple point that most people were probably thinking from the start. A wolf turns up attacking livestock shortly after a nearby wolf goes missing. Obviously, that isn't a coincidence, and the idea that there just happened to be a second wolf that got loose at the same time is ridiculously far-fetched. During my research, I found that Bain was in the midst of working with the planning authorities to extend his zoological gardens, so bad press caused by his old escaped wolf being associated with all these attacks wasn't a good look for him. Hence why he was very keen to tell people it couldn't have been his wolf. But as for why he almost confesses in that interview though, I couldn't tell you. What I can tell you though is that his zoo closed in 1905 after all this. And after that, I don't know what happens to him. When I was reading through all these newspaper articles, I assumed that all the stories of the wolf being seen in areas miles away from Allendale and Allenheads were just from people who had read about the attacks in the press and wanted to join in with the excitement. When I read reports of the wolf jumping over hedges and walls, I thought it was a great exaggeration from people, but after seeing the evidence from many witnesses and the confessions from Bain, alongside the claw marks on the roof and the long limbs of the beast, I have to conclude that there is a lot more truth to these sightings than I initially thought. Except the story about the cat being fed to the wolf. That was made up, but it did make me laugh. So what became of the wolf? The body was too badly mutilated to be preserved, so it was beheaded and sent to the Midland Railway's headquarters at Derby. For a week, the head of the Allendale wolf was displayed in the window of a taxidermist shop in Derby, before being mounted outside the Midland Railway's boardroom. In 1936, the head of the wolf was still there, but it seems that it vanished soon after that. The trail goes cold. It's a mystery. Like I said, it was never confirmed that the wolf belonged to Bain. The case is still open in that regard, and he is the suspected owner of the Allendale wolf. We got off pretty lightly there, but from the evidence I've presented you, I propose that there was only one wolf, and it was Ivanovich, the wolf that was in his ownership but somehow got loose. The wolf was elusive, fast, certainly got about a bit, but nevertheless, it was the wolf that had its origins in Shotley Bridge. The Allendale wolf was all but forgotten about until 1971. 2 carved stone heads, thought to be of Romano-British origin, were unearthed in the garden of a house in Hexham. The Robson family, and those that owned the heads after them, were subsequently haunted by a nightmarish creature. The creature in question was half man and half wolf, and people soon drew connections to the wolf that had terrorised nearby Allendale. But that's a story for another day. Allendale and the surrounding area is a beautiful place, and while much of this information about the wolf has been unearthed again by me after so long, the people of this part of Northumberland are no stranger to the tale of the wolf. On the last Saturday in September, an effigy of the Allendale wolf is burned in the town square, and people are invited to howl. The local brewery also makes a nice ale inspired by the events, which you can buy from the local cooperative, or, if you're lucky, it'll be on tap in the pub. As always, a big thank you to my patrons and supporters who I really couldn't do this without, especially the 6 new people who have signed up to help me. Now, this is actually going to be the last video that I do for a while, because all my efforts at the moment are being focused on my filming trip that I'm going to be doing in Northern Ireland, specifically in County Antrim. So, this is it for now, but I will be back with some excellent tales and stories from the Emerald Isle.